Those pants look nice.
My friend and I have a joke.
Joke.
It's not like it's not like a. My wife, by the way, like the king type jokes. She does it. There's a point to this joke, believe it or not. It's not a joke. It's funny. The difference between being married and being
Together.
married.
I'm done.
If you're married, you're a lot more likely to take off your wedding ring, go down to the bar, and pick up some girl. Married, you ain't doing that. Are you married? Yeah, I'm married. It's kind of like married. What do little bunny ears mean? Yeah, being sarcastic. So kind of today what we're doing neutrality. America moves from the first one to the second one. Beyonce is very correct. So what we're going to talk about today is how we got there, how we went from one to the other. And we're going to start right after World War I. What happens to the peace treaty in the Senate? What happens to the Treaty of Versailles in the United States?
Denied.
It's denied. It's rejected. The United States never signs the Treaty of Versailles. We make our own kind of treaties with our enemies in World War I, and that's the end of that. We don't join the League of Nations. The American people decisively reject Wilson's call for collective security and a league. So we reject the treaty. We talked about disarmament, that we signed treaties with a lot of friendly powers agreeing. What does disarmament mean?
Take away everything.
Take, not everything, but take away.
Evil.
Take your weapons away. That we're not going to have as many battleships and cruisers and destroyers and bombers and all stuff like that. Disarmament. And we're kind of in this, there is a sense that the Great War was a waste. That we kind of got, you were right there. We kind of got, the sense is that the United States got snookered into fighting a war. Isn't that a great word, by the way? Snookered? Let's see if we figure that out. There's a sense, there's a feeling that the United States got snookered into fighting a war that it didn't need to fight. What do you think snookered means? Yeah, sucked into, tricked into, lied into. You got snookered into something. There's a sense that the country was tricked into, and that the 130,000 casualties, that's a lot of people. The 130,000 casualties, that's like the population of Elizabeth. That the 130,000 American soldiers who died in the war, what they were fighting for in the 1920s, people thought, and they said, you know what, who the hell would have cared if Germany won? Germany won, France lost, who cares? It's not like the Germans are like these evil, horrible people. That the war was a waste, and that we had been tricked into fighting it. that Wilson, with all of his war to end war stuff, is a little bit silly. War to end war. Okay. Work on 30,000 lives, but treaty we rejected? No. There's also kind of this sense that the war was brought about by a big conspiracy. Oh.
You got the bomb.
Anyway.
Unless you're on the
Came back alive from his mission. Let's leave the war. There was a strength. We might even give him a medal. There's a sense that the Great War was a waste, and there's also a sense that we were sucked into the war based on a conspiracy by big business and big banks and other people who profited from the war. Because wars, especially if the fighting is being done somewhere else, can be very, very profitable. Where does a country, where does the United States buy tanks? How? Who is we? So when the army wants to buy a new tank, what do? Does the government manufacture that? No, the government does not manufacture that. That's made by a company that makes tanks. You know, tanks are us. Like, the B-2 bomber is developed by the Lockheed Corporation. What that means, and now there are rules that, Aurelio can't go into Tanks R Us, drop down, $30 million bucks and come out with an M1A1 Abrams tank. There are rules about this, but the government, what the government does is it puts out a contract. It says, we need a tank that will do all of these ass-kickery things. Who wants to build one for us? And companies say, I would like to build one for us. They get a giant contract from the government, and the government buys tanks or planes or anything. Rockets and missiles and all the stuff that is designed to kill people and break things. Which is, in the end, the purpose of an army, is to kill people and break things. Fundamental truth of the world. But if the government all of a sudden orders 10,000 new airplanes, the people who run the airplane company are going to make a lot of money. And a lot of people look at that and think that that is a little unseemly. That you're raking in millions of dollars in profits while, the boys are over in France getting shot up in the mud. That's, a lot of people look at that and say, it's a little shady, at best. And a lot of people in the United States, including members of Congress, start to say, and there starts to be these kind of anti-Semitic overtones to it, that a bunch of Jewish bankers and Jewish industrialists pulled us into World War I for the purpose of making money. And that belief gains significant traction in the United States in the 1920s. We talked about the elites in America. This is the time of the lost generation. Those elites that are starting to really have problems with ordinary American society, and the belief that society can only be improved if you knock the whole damn thing down and start over. Why are they called the lost generation? What made them lost? Well, World War I made them lost. All the horrors of the trenches. You add all these things up, and in the 1920s, most Americans were perfectly willing to never have anything to do with the rest of the frickin' world again. And it was reflected in the laws that we passed as the dictators in Europe and Asia started gaining influence and power. There are 3 Neutrality Acts, 35, 36, and 38. They are all slightly different. In the purposes of a survey level class like this is, we are going to lump them in as one big thing. And basically there are 2 big fat rules. Rule number 1, no selling war supplies to that's not how you spell belligerent. There we go. 35, 36, 38 are the years, yes. Number 1, no selling war supplies to belligerents. What's a belligerent?
A supply.
They don't know what they're doing.
Is it like something to like
Not belligerent. What does that mean? Yes. Give me all your freaking lunch money now.
Bully!
That's not, no. Belligerent. I'm being belligerent.
You're being aggressive.
I'm being aggressive. That's a good word. The word belligerent as an adjective is a person who's being very. Now, in a political science legal sense, a belligerent is any country that is doing what? It's more broader than that. Any country that's at war. Belligerent is just a fancy way of saying country at war. We are not, so the first part of the Neutrality Act is we're not going to sell anything to any country that's at war. And if you notice, the term does not make a differentiation between aggressor and aggressed. That we're saying here that if Stephen jumps Eddie, we're out of it. It doesn't matter that Eddie was just walking down the street minding his own business and Stephen jumped on top of him and started pummeling him. We're not getting involved in either side. We are neutral. We're out. We're not selling anything to anybody. Does it? And there's no differentiation made between a country who started it and a country who's just defending itself. The second thing, no loans to belligerents. Why not? What happened after World War I?
They don't pay back.
Yeah, we got burned. We lent Britain and France billions and billions of dollars and we pretty much got none of it back. And if you loan people money, especially your friends, and your friends are like, yeah, sorry, I don't have it. You get it from Bob. Because Bob didn't get it to you, huh? That is going to make a lot of people angry.
Alright, it was Christmas time, I was at 5.
Does it have some finger pointing going on over here?
Wait, what?
No sales of weapons, no loaning of money to countries at war. We are out. Europe can stew in its own juice, Asia can stew in its own juice, for all we care. And then the world starts to get a little more dangerous looking. And in 1939, the war breaks out in September of 1939. September of 1939, Germany attacks Poland. Britain and France come into the war against Germany in defense of Poland's sovereignty. Poland is destroyed in a matter of 2 weeks. The Germans invade from one end, 2 weeks later the Soviets invade from the other. Poland ceases to exist as an independent country again in about 3 weeks in 1939. The war breaks out, and Americans choose a side morally, much quicker than we did in World War I. In World War I, there's enough Germans in the United States, enough Irish in the United States, with close, relatively still, emotional ties with Europe, that the Germans, the French, the English, they're all a bunch of, old school Europeans, and Americans have always kind of prided ourselves on being different from Europe. That, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that in World War I, to make the Germans into the bad guy, a lot of propaganda had to be put out there. And the British were really good at it. You know, the Hun and the Germans raping Belgian nuns and killing children. But it was work. It was, I mean, there was truth in those things. That did happen. But from the degree of the propaganda, you might get the idea that this was happening, 56 times a day. The British propaganda in the United States in World War I to turn the Germans into an enemy was very successful. But it was work. World War II is easier. Quite frankly, Americans, from the time Hitler comes to power, Hitler is a little bit of a joke. And you can afford to joke about Hitler living, 5,000 miles away from Hitler, but Hitler's kind of goofy. He's this little short guy with this funny mustache, and his hair is always like on his face, and he stands around and sticks his arms out, and he's giving these speeches, he's waving his arms all around all the time. He's screaming into microphones. You got a bunch of Germans, yah, 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 and everyone's like, it's a joke. It's that you watch this on. It doesn't have a video of that because we can take it out of context, and it's gonna be like Nazi teacher and Elizabeth. There's gonna be like a vine out there. Oh my God! Oh my God! He knows what the internet is. My point is, there's more. World War II, like, which side we're on morally is very clear from the beginning. We don't like Hitler. We think he's a wackadoo. And we definitely want the democracies to win. Which means, in 1939, when we see Hitler smash Poland, because here's something to remember. Everyone was expecting World War I. See, that's what happens. Like, when you fight a war, you always kind of imagine, and that's human nature. When you fight a war, you imagine it's going to be just like the last one you fought. That's like, if you go to play, you play, football against, the Jets this year. Next year, you sort of expect, well, it's going to be the same way it goes. Generals are very famous for being very able to fight the last war. Not necessarily so good at fighting this one. This is different. And people were expecting what they got in World War I. They're expecting the trenches, the barbed wire, the slogs, the mud, the slow. Germany defeats Poland. Poland has a big army. They're incredibly brave. Poland is defeated in 2 weeks. This whole country in the middle of Europe just disappears. And Americans kind of say, oh wow, this might be different this time around. And we pass a law that's intended to still appear neutral, because it's technically going to be neutral, but it's definitely going to favor the Allies, the British and the French. And we call it cash and carry. Now, because remember, in 1939, the vast majority of Americans, 80% at least, want nothing to do with this war. But we are willing to kind of take our first little step away from strict neutrality into what's called cash and carry. And cash and carry is exactly what it sounds like. You can go back to, they all relate to each other. No selling war supplies, no loans. Well, now we're changing it a little. What do you think cash and carry means? What's the cash part? Yeah, if you have money, you can buy it. And you gotta carry it home. Exactly. That's precisely what it is. can buy stuff with cash as long as you can carry it home. The 1st of June. Thanks a lot. Yeah. Fine. Yep. So the first thing, cash and carry. You can buy stuff with cash as long as you can carry it back to Europe. If you want to ship it across the ocean in your own ship and you can pay for it with your cash, awesome. We're not lending anybody any money and we're not shipping it for you. You got to pay cash and come to the store. Cash and carry. Now, there's no rule about who we will and won't sell to. We'll sell to anybody who has cash and can carry, but in reality, only the Allies can do that. Why? Britain's Navy. There's no German merchant marine that can sail a German ship across the Atlantic Ocean in the teeth of the British Navy, stop in an American port, load up with stuff, and sail back. The British Navy is weaker than it's been in many hundreds of years, but it's still powerful enough to stop German surface ships. So 98–99% of the stuff that we are selling, that we are sending, is bought by the British and the French. And the Americans say, all right, Great Britain and France, you go deal with crazy Hitler now. Buy our stuff, carry your own ships, we'll watch, we're rooting for you, go for it, beat him. We don't like Hitler, we think he's a little wackadoo, but we're out, we're not getting involved. In April of 1940, Hitler's war machine conquers Norway, conquers Denmark. In May is the long-awaited invasion of Western Europe. Hitler invades the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France all in the same day. The American people are expecting kind of a repeat, the world is expecting a repeat of World War I, that the French army will kind of fall back and then stiffen and counterattack, and you'll get a big old mess like you had in World War I, except that doesn't happen. What happens to the French army? It's destroyed, and France surrenders in 6 weeks. The French army is turned, the reserves are non-existent or wasted, there's poor communication, the Germans are really good at what they're doing. France is forced to ask for a ceasefire, and France surrenders in 6 weeks. Hitler humiliates the French further. He digs out the old railway car where the Germans signed the instrument of surrender after World War I. Hitler brings it to Compiègne, forest outside of Paris, makes the French representatives sign their own armistice in the same railroad car that the Germans had signed their surrender in 1918. And then there's a famous little video of Hitler doing a little dance in front of the Eiffel Tower. He's like, yeah, you look at Hitler's little jig. Yeah, it's video. It was newsreel footage, so you can YouTube it. And that kind of shocks the American people. That, like, the French army was the second, was supposed to be a match for the Germans, and they weren't. And now Great Britain is alone. This is Churchill's finest hour. We're going to do some Churchill stuff next week. The British Army is miraculously saved from Europe, the miracle of Dunkirk. We'll talk about that. It's a really cool story. Has a connection to the Titanic of all things. But now Great Britain, with most of its equipment left on the beach in France, saved its soldiers, going to save their stuff, is sitting there against Germany, which has conquered Poland, conquered Norway, conquered Belgium, conquered the Netherlands, conquered Austria, conquered Czechoslovakia, conquered France, and Great Britain's empire is kind of standing alone. And most people expected that the British would deal. That they would say to Hitler, all right, what can we work out? Hitler expected the British to negotiate. And Hitler was very willing to give the British decent terms. They could keep their empire, keep their fleet, as long as they didn't interfere with Germany on the continent. But Churchill said, no way. We're not going to sign any sort of agreement. We're not even going to talk. We're out to beat you, Mr. Hitler. And for an entire year, the British fight alone against the Germans. Problem is, it's expensive. Britain pretty much takes the wealth that they had accumulated in 300 years of being one of the most powerful nations on earth, and it's gone in a year and a half. They spend pretty much their entire liquid national wealth. They sell billions of dollars of property that the United Kingdom held around the world. They sell, their gold reserves they take from there. They're selling everything, and eventually they run out of money. That a country only has, the British ran out of money. They had no money left. And no money left means there's no way that they can buy cash for everything that they need. Churchill and Roosevelt had kind of struck up a friendship by this point. And Churchill made it clear to Roosevelt, look, you want to be in this war. You're sitting there on the sidelines, making us pay top dollar for everything that we need to fight Hitler, all by ourselves, thank you very much. What can you do for us, United States? And cash and carry in 1941, early 1941, I believe, May of 1941, is going to change. The cash part is going to become something called Lend-Lease. Lend-Lease is a strange thing. Now, we have to understand, Roosevelt thinks the United States is going to have to get into this war eventually. The problem is the American people have no desire to get into the war. So Roosevelt has to play that little dance where he is, there's kind of a question. Should the president do what the people want? Or should the president lead the people where he wants them to go? It's a very fine line sometimes. Roosevelt, very carefully, very slowly, and he deserves all the credit in the world for this, very slowly brings the American people around to the idea that there was a degree of responsibility that the American Republic had in this situation. But it's a slow process. And if he, if he goes off too fast, the American people are going to reject him and say, no way, who cares if the British Empire is destroyed by the Germans? So Roosevelt proposes what he calls Lend-Lease. He gets on the radio in one of his fireside chats, talking to the American people. People gather around their radio, and Roosevelt's got the sound of a crackling fire, and he has this very patrician upper class, because he's born wealthy as all hell. He's never goes to school. He's educated by private tutors, in private schools his whole life. Has this patrician accent that kind of people believe, because it was an accent of authority. And Roosevelt delivers what he calls his Lend-Lease idea. And he says to the American people, look, American people, if your neighbor's house was on fire and your neighbor ran over and said, let me borrow your hose, what would you say? You'd say, sure. All we're doing, Roosevelt says, is we are giving Great Britain a hose to fight the fire. Churchill plays into this. Churchill gives a speech to the House of Commons in which he says, give us the tools and we will finish the job. And the American, okay, one of these big national debates, everyone's talking, should we, and what it basically is we are going to lend Great Britain stuff. And then a lot of people start to think, say, wait.
Stop.
Lend? What the hell is the point of lending military equipment? Who wants a used bullet? What is the value of a used bullet? What is the value of a used tank? What is the value of a used airplane? Why the hell would we want this stuff back? Lend? A lot of Americans start saying, wait, this is, all this is we're just giving away stuff for free. That ain't cool. And then a lot of Americans start to say about that hose metaphor, they say, this is a dumb metaphor. It looks cute on the surface, but it's dumb when you think about it. A lot of Americans start to say, they say, if your neighbor runs up to you and says, my house is on fire, can I have your hose? A normal person runs over with their damn hose themselves and says, I will help you fight your fire. I'm sorry? Now, Nelsie, your neighbor's house is on fire. They run up to you. Let me borrow your hose. Oh yeah, sure, here, go. And Nelsie goes back inside and sits down on her couch. What? Nelsie's going to get out there and do what she can to help.
I'll bring my own hose and I'll go help you and I'll get involved.
Right.
But they really didn't want to be involved in this.
No, there's plenty of Americans that do want to be involved.
Oh, okay.
That the country is moving. There's always millions of Americans that say, look, this is an important fight. We're the most powerful country in the world. Britain needs our help. They're not a majority. They're there. Roosevelt needs 50%. Roosevelt needs at least half the American people to be on board with this. You know, he's got 30%. He's going to work on the rest of them. And this is one way that Roosevelt brings the United States closer to war. We're still neutral, but we're becoming more neutral. Exactly. Lend-Lease passes by about 5 votes. It's very close. With Lend-Lease, Roosevelt also gets through Congress a peacetime draft. Roosevelt says, we're not getting into the war. But just in case we do, we got to be ready. Because if you remember World War I, we were not ready. In World War I, it took us a year to get an army to Europe. Roosevelt says, if we're not getting involved, but if we do, we got to be ready. And in 1940, the United States establishes a peacetime draft. That men started being drafted into the army, even though the United States was not at war. What this serves to do, kind of talking about what we were talking about earlier in the week, this ends the Depression. Like that. Why, Aurelio? Why does cash and carry, Lend-Lease, and the draft end the Depression?
Okay. Well, I guess because more people will start being pro-war, so that instead of like doing nothing, they'll start helping out in the government. Will start helping out everybody by giving them jobs for the war. Like, yeah.
Government doesn't give people jobs.
No, well, I guess supply jobs, right? Like,
Where are these jobs coming from, Aurelio? No, not mostly.
Manufacturing supplies.
For who?
Military. Well, for the war.
For
All.
Great Britain.
Yes.
What ends the Depression is Great Britain orders, we need 50,000 trucks, 20,000 tanks, 20,000 fighter planes. Okay, let's go make them. And that's what ends the Depression's over by 1940. And it's over in 1940 because A, you're reducing the labor force through the draft, and B, much more importantly, is you all of a sudden, someone's got to make 50,000 trucks. Factories roar back to life. Down in Bethlehem, just from one specific example, in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, was Bethlehem Steel. It's 3 miles long, this steel mill. The remnants, the ruins of it are still there. You can see them, right off the highway. But in World War II, Bethlehem Steel was working at full capacity. That they said that when the orders started coming in 1940, 1941, and especially when the United States got involved in 1942, the orders on individual pieces of paper literally reached from your desk to the ceiling. That's how much steel was needed for this, that, and the other thing. They ran the steel mill 24 hours a day, 3 8-hour shifts, 12 to 8, 8 to 4, 4 to midnight. Each shift employed 50,000 people. 50,000 people go to work at Bethlehem Steel. They leave work, they're replaced by another 50,000 people, and over the course of 5-6 years, you can imagine how much steel is poured and molded into things that is useful to kill people and break things in the war effort. So the Depression's over, because we're producing a lot of stuff that is designed to kill people and break things. Now the carry part also is becoming a problem. Oops. So we took care of the cash problem with Lend-Lease. The carry problem is this. We know from World War I, how do you defeat Great Britain?
This shit.
These two. What?
Make them starve.
Starve them out. Starve them out. Well, Great Britain has a much, much tougher time in World War II keeping itself fed than in World War I for a lot of reasons. One, the U-boats are a lot better technologically. They can go further, go faster, go more quietly, stay out longer. That's one problem. Problem number two is Great Britain in the Depression reduced the size of its navy. They don't have the same size navy or merchant fleet as they had before. Three, when France got conquered, Germany has all these bases right here on the Atlantic Ocean. They send U-boats out throughout the entire Atlantic, including all the way to New York and New Jersey. My grandmother grew up in Jersey City, and then during World War II, she remembers that there was a blackout. That when the sun went down, you had to cover your curtains with blackout materials. You had to cover your headlights with blackout materials. New York, Newark, Elizabeth, Jersey City, all of the East Coast New Jersey city, or the American cities were blacked out by law.
Why?
Why?
I don't know why I asked you.
I know, anyone have an idea why?
So there wouldn't be a type of journey?
Well, what's the light issue? Why black out?
So you can't see.
Who can't see what?
With the air.
Think about that for a second. There's no bombers. Bombers can't reach that far.
What are the airplanes?
We're talking about submarines. Deja, you're going. Guys, we're not talking about bombers. Bombers can't fly that far in World War II.
So that we wouldn't be visible.
Wouldn't be visible to enemy what? What ships? What are we talking about here, folks? Submarines. We do not, that if the Germans know where the port of Elizabeth is, they're just going to hang out right outside the port and shoot and torpedo every ship that leaves the port of Elizabeth. And this happened all the time. Do you know how many shipwrecks there are off the Jersey Shore, within 50 miles of shore? All these World War II ships that they left American ports and were torpedoed out of the water close to the shore. The reason to black out is so that when a submarine in the middle of the night surfaces with its little periscope and the guy goes like this, he has no idea where he is. He can't identify his location with a lit up city. So you turn the lights off from the outside. You have every window in Elizabeth had blackout curtains. And there was wardens in the neighborhood whose job was civil defense, who, if they could see light in your house, they'd knock on your door and say, please cover your window.
Do you get a ticket?
You could, yeah.
So they only want at night, like the submarines?
Well, they'd only surface at night, because you can't see them. If they surface in the middle of the day, airplanes, so what happens is airplanes fly over and be looking for submarines. Airplanes are not gonna, you could fly an airplane at night, but it's a lot harder to see a submarine, a black submarine surfacing on a black ocean in the middle of the night. So submarines obviously surface at night, where we all live apparently. The problem is, the British have to take that's a long way. That's 3,000–4,000 miles in an ocean that is just teeming with German submarines. The British are losing around by this time 1 million tons a month of shipping. 1 million tons of ships every month are being sent to the bottom of the ocean due to the U-boats, and the British are running out of ships. They're running out of, so what the British are doing to protect their ships is called the convoy system. A very simple concept. Again, I'll show you a picture. Pictures are always fun. Here is a convoy. These are obviously ships. What you do is you get a bunch of big old cargo ships, you get them in one spot, and you surround them with what? With warships. And you all go together. Everyone says, and all the captains get together, and they're under the command of a naval officer. They said, this is the route, this is how fast we're going. And 30 cargo ships will be protected by 10 Navy ships. And they obviously go at the speed of the slowest cargo ship, with the Navy ships kind of patrolling, looking for submarines on the outside. This is the convoy system. So if you're a slow cargo ship, this is the only way you can survive. If a submarine, though, gets inside of that protective shell, they're going to wreak havoc on these, slow cargo ships. And it's part of World War II that we don't usually think of, but tens of thousands of merchant seamen, like guys whose just job it was, they weren't in the Navy, they were just guys that worked on ships, died in the war when their cargo ships were, their tanker ships, cargo ships, are sent to the bottom. Tens of thousands in the course of the war, both British and American. But the British are running out of ships to do the convoys. The British, obviously, they have responsibilities all around the world. They're running out of the warships that protect convoys. So, carry is going to become, well, what we're going to do is called destroyers for bases. Churchill makes a deal with Roosevelt. Says, we'll give you access to some British colonies in the Western Hemisphere. You can have our colonies, have our bases. That all these British colonies down in the Caribbean, American ships can now use. In exchange for that, the United States is going to give Great Britain 50 old destroyers. Destroyer is a little warship, fast, that's just, its specialty is kind of hunting out submarines and sinking them. This obviously, Churchill is dealing from a position of weakness here. He's giving away colonies in exchange for 50 old ships. But that was what the British Empire was reduced to at that point. So we've moved from real neutrality to cash and carry to giving away stuff for free and giving the British ships to defend the stuff that we're giving them for free. And then it goes one step further. The British are still having a real tough time bringing this stuff all the way from the East Coast of North America, whether it's from the United States or Canada or South America, that the British have lifelines around the world, that they're bringing stuff into Great Britain from all over the planet. Most of it, much of it, coming from here, but not all. What the US Navy offers to do in August of 1941 throws any pretension of neutrality out the window completely. Because what the United States does in August of 1941 is draw the line down the middle of the Atlantic Ocean from Cape Farewell in Greenland. And says to the British, all right, look, we know you're running out of ships. This is what we'll do. The United States will escort your ships to this line. The Navy is going to escort your ships to the line where they'll be met by the Royal Navy, and the Royal Navy will take the convoy in the second half of the leg. Cool, yes. Neutrality? No. Not even close. We are now pretty much giving away stuff to Britain for free. We are using our Navy to protect that stuff halfway across the ocean. And obviously, what's going to happen when an American Navy ship meets a German U-boat? They're going to fight. And what you're seeing, by the summer of 1941, with the United States neutral, is a naval war between the United States Navy and the Kriegsmarine, the German Navy. That the German U-boats are sinking American destroyers are sinking German U-boats, and it benefits both Roosevelt and Hitler to say neutrality. It benefits Roosevelt to say neutrality because he's still very slowly bringing the American people along. And a lot of Americans are going to say, the hell are we doing escorting these convoys? We shouldn't be doing that, we're neutral. We don't want to be involved in a war. So Roosevelt's not going to say, they attacked the American ship, we're going to war. Because a lot of people would say, well, we're not being neutral. Why wouldn't the Germans attack the ship? Hitler, for his part, has no desire to make an issue of this with the United States because he's already fighting Great Britain. He invaded the Soviet Union in June of 1941. He don't need also to be fighting the United States. So Hitler is perfectly happy with this undeclared war. Roosevelt is perfectly happy with this undeclared war. And that's where the country finds itself on December 7th, 1941. More and more Americans, by December 1941, about half of Americans have kind of accepted the inevitable that there's going to be fighting at some point. But half haven't. Half of Americans are still, no way, stay out. And then Pearl Harbor happens. And then, in the words of Admiral Isamu Yamamoto, we have awakened a sleeping giant. And on December 8th, 95% of Americans were ready to get involved. Now, the last thing I want to say about this, first of all, thematically, we should be able to track the interventionist versus the isolationist sentiment from the late 1890s all the way up to here. And use these as examples of, yes, we want to intervene, no we don't. Yes, we do, no we don't. So that's kind of from an AP test perspective. World War II, for the average American, World War I is an idealistic crusade. Americans are fighting to end war, spread democracy, all these Woodrow Wilson-y things. World War II, especially against Germany, Japan was revenge. Remember Pearl Harbor. But the war against Germany is seen by the vast majority of Americans as a job. A job we'll be good at, but a job that is distasteful, and we'd, quite frankly, rather be doing something else. Necessary, yes. Distasteful, yes. And Americans go about the war, especially against Germany, without this ideological fervor that animated the first war. It's a job that needs doing. Do not forget your Sunday window. Have a great weekend. I love you all.